I guess let's talk about Lies of P and my thoughts on it. Sure, we'll do that. Put myself in the corner here. So, this game came out a year and 9 months ago. I'm not sure if I did a thoughts video on the base game when it came out. We'll go over the base game and the DLC. This wasn't my first time playing the game. I played it, I think, roughly around the time it came out. I don't remember exactly, but I played it before. We finished it. I did one playthrough of it. I always had the intention of going back and playing it as well because all the Souls-likes that I have played, I have done that, actually. It just kind of slipped through the cracks, right? A lot of things have come out every year. There's always a bunch of games that come out that I want to play, so I just never got around to it. Luckily, you know, we knew that there was a DLC announcement. They announced the DLC, I think, relatively quickly after the game came out, I believe, once the game sold well. So we always kind of knew that a DLC was coming, the same way that I think one is supposed to be coming for Black Myth Wukong as well. Probably going to do the same thing for that game. So it was nice to replay the game and go through the DLC alongside with it. So that was nice. I long spiel, as I always like to give my background and history on things before I get into them. I bring that up because we had a much easier time overall. I have the exact numbers for this playthrough and my deaths, right, to know, but I don't have the exact numbers compared to my first playthrough. And I want to get that data. It will allow me to understand how much maybe I have improved as a player from maybe Elden Ring, or how much like having played the game made me better even though I hadn't played in a year and 9 months. I'm curious about both of those as well because we overall had an easier time. Like, I died to one boss, I think, like, the one in the swamp at least, like, 19 times. This time I died 8 times. So I don't know if that's because I've played the game prior or if I played other Souls games, because I had played 500 hours at Elden Ring. I'm not sure. But overall, it was a pretty easy time. We were coasting. King of Puppets was the first one to test me, really. And then the next one after that was the green thing in the swamp. And then pretty much no boss from the main game tested me at all for the rest of the game. We practically died maybe once to some bosses or 0 to another. So that was pretty shocking. The DLC, however, was pretty jarring. Being available at the spot it's available in, I think it's kind of odd that they allow you to go in it. I can't recall when they allow you to go into the DLC in other games, like all the other games. I didn't do the DLC for Dark Souls 1. I can't recall when you're able to enter the DLC for Dark Souls 2. And I know that you can enter the DLC for Dark Souls 3 when you get to I think it's the cathedral. When you open up the church doors and the guy's like sitting right there begging on the floor. It's not that far into the game. So this game, I think, like, you know, there's a lot of complaints going around, say, like in the Steam, about people complaining about the difficulty. I think to a degree they're kind of justified, and I'm not even talking about like the actual difficulty of the fights. Because, yeah, they are difficult, hands down. They're more difficult than, I would say, almost any boss in the base game. Almost all the fights in the DLC, maybe except for like 2 of them. Boss fights. But I think it's design-wise kind of set up and not in favor of the player. I think you really want the player to go into the DLC after the game's over. Because those chapters that you're allowing them to go into and potentially skip or come back and do later, one, they're going to come back later and steamroll those chapters. That's one. So the experience, the original experience that you designed for the game before the DLC will be lost in those later chapters if they decide to go into the DLC and stay in there a little bit. Those bosses will become easier. Maybe that's what they want. Sure, that's fine. Like the player. But like the creator of the game, right? I can't imagine that's probably what they want. I mean, they probably want people to play the game any which way they want to, which is fine. But the difficulty that you put in mind for those later levels, after you give them the ability to go to the DLC, they completely become null and voided if people go through a couple bosses in the DLC. I don't think that's good for the game, personally. And I don't think it's good for the player, because the player will go into the DLC and they will get fucking steamrolled by regular mobs. It is very jarring. There's one point in the game, in the DLCs, where the story and both of them will kind of line up in the same place. And so for me, what I did was I continued from that point on. When I got to a new Stargazer, I would go to another Stargazer. Now, I didn't hold myself to this 100%. Like, if there was a Stargazer, like, 5 steps away from another one, then I would just continue on, right? But if I felt like enough time has passed and I got to a Stargazer, I would swap to the base game. And there got to a point to where I had a boss fight in the base game. The second Black Rabbit Brotherhood fight. That fight was a joke compared to almost regular enemies in the DLC, like regular average enemies in the DLC. They were hitting me for peanuts. It was very shocking to me. I was going into the fight knowing it was coming. I was worried about it because I was like, oh great, here we go. I got to fight these 4 guys again, and they're going to be more aggressive this time. And they were, and my weapon broke. And I had to go into the menu and try to switch my weapon mid-fight, which they don't allow you to do it as easy in this game. Say like Elden Ring. In Elden Ring, the right side of the screen is not blocked, so you can actually see your character moving, and you can still control them while simultaneously going in the menu and selecting items. You can do them both at the same time. You can't do that in this game. If you're running in a boss fight and you got to switch your weapon because my weapon broke, which was my fault, you have to stop and hope that you can switch, and if someone hits you, you get knocked out of the menu, right? I had to attempt this 3 times to switch my weapon to something else, another like leveled up weapon. And I was able to do it because they were barely damaging me. It was very shocking, the sheer amount of damage you take in the DLC from just regular ass mobs. And I think that is setting people up for failure right here. Because they are going to be hitting you at least, in my opinion, at least like 75% more damage, it feels like. The enemies were at least, some of them were 2-shotting me, some of them were 3-shotting me. Where in the base game, I could at least take maybe like 4 or 5 hits. And those 2 additional hits, they matter. So I think design-wise, they might be sabotaging players just a little bit. And those players that are complaining about the game being too hard, I think they need those extra levels from the later levels to go into the DLC and have a bit more of a buffer. So I think game design availability wise, I don't think it's a good idea. That being said, I think the DLC itself is pretty good. It does a lot of things I enjoy. There's voice acted memos. Don't get me wrong, I like reading. I think it's fine. I read a lot in these games, but I also like ones that you can hear the characters talk themselves. That was really nice. There was these different cutscenes that would happen, like you would beat a mob and then your camera would get hijacked to emphasize on something. The base game never did this. It was actually enjoyable when it involved a character related to the story, like one of the characters that you're involved in with. I thought that was really nice. There's a lot of lore in the DLC that fills in blank pockets for the base game. That's also nice if you like reading. There's a lot of answers to questions you may have. There's some don't really have definitive answers, which kind of suck, like origins of certain things. But you do get most of your answers they kind of get ramified and answered for you, which is always appreciated. And just honestly, the story that they're telling in the DLC is really nice on top of the gameplay. I know LoL's story and Souls games, but they did put a pretty good story here, I think, revolving the main character, Geppetto, and the characters in the DLC I won't talk about because the DLC is not that old. I think it's all pretty nice. I do wish that we got to see a little bit more like hands-on, like, oh shit, this, like, that's what happened for certain things. But what they give you is really good. The new enemies that they give you, I think, are all pretty creative that they throw at you. Some of them can be a bit of a hassle. Some of them are just modified versions of pre-existing enemies in the base game, but that's okay. That happens in pretty much every Souls-like game. I'm not going to fault this one for that either. But it was pretty enjoyable. Like, it's just, I think the first third of the DLC, in my opinion, is more harder than the last 2/3, and I think that's probably not the best way to do it because you're front ending the difficulty And don't get me wrong, the final fight is challenging. I'm not saying that's not the case, but I was able to kind of coast once I got past that second boss for the most part. And I think maybe you want to balance that out a little bit. Maybe make it more of like a graph going up, not a graph starting up, going down, and then revving back up. I feel like maybe that's kind of not a good idea. And I think the complaints you're getting related to it, I think it's based upon that. But outside of that, I thought the DLC was pretty fantastic. All the new animations, the new weapons, there's plenty of DLC privilege. Weapons in the DLC have so much more privilege than the base game ones. It's insane. Some of the designs are pretty sick. I liked actually a handful of the weapons that they added, and I actually want to praise that quite a bit, because I really went through the base game not really wanting to change my weapon, not really wanting to engage with the flip-flopping of the parts of the weapons. I didn't really care for it. I still don't care for it. But the weapons that they added were interesting enough for me to want to use them. They added a lot of really interesting weapons that I feel like, for me in the base game, I just never really was interested that much. There was a weapon that I predominantly started using that was from the base game, and it made me question, how did I ever miss it? Legion arms still never made me want to use them. I basically went through the game barely with ever using them. If anything, I would use like the line attach one that you get in the base game. I still feel like that's the most useful one. Other than, I never even used it. That's why I don't have one on right now, because I don't incorporate them into my gameplay. I'd rather just go whack something with my weapon. So unfortunately, that's a whole system in this game that I just underappreciate. The changes to the court system I thought were really good. Like I said, the weapons are really good. I think it's an overall great time. And then I would say content-wise, I think the DLC is also good. Usually, I end up feeling that DLC is usually overpriced for how much you get out of it. Like sometimes the DLC on a $60 game could be like 2/3 of the price at $40. And I don't feel like you're getting 2/3 of the game, of the base game in the DLC oftentimes with stuff. It's very rare that I feel like you get something like Resident Evil 4 Remake Separate Ways that was $10, and it was as long, if not longer, than the $50 Resident Evil 3 Remake, which is kind of crazy. I don't really feel like that happens that often, but I feel like Lies of P does this. I feel like Overturn is worth the asking price of $30. It does feel like you do get half of the game in this DLC. You get 25 amulets alone. The base game only has 30. So they almost giving you as many as you would have gotten in the base game alone. There's a lot of stuff they give you here in this DLC. So I think it's well worth it. I find very little hard things to say about this game. I might have picked on this game throughout my playthrough, saying like I do still feel the same way. I do still feel like this game is playing it very safe. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. To the Dark Souls formula, they ain't really trying to reinvent the wheel. It's kind of like Resident Evil 1 Remake here. They're just taking a formula and like adding new layers on it. Like the Legion arm, for instance, right? Not a concept you would find in Dark Souls. But most of the concepts you will find in Dark Souls are exactly the same here. They're not trying to change it. That's okay. I do have a issue with like community hating on ones that take more liberty and try to be different. And I absolutely hate the term Souls-like with a passion, because I feel like it makes the community look down on games if they try to be different and take inspiration from Dark Souls rather than trying to copy them flat out and be similar. I hate that term. I've been saying the last couple of days on my stream, we don't call fighting games Street Fighter-like. We don't call Mortal Kombat Street Fighter-like. We're not over here calling Fatal Fury City of the Wolves Street Fighter-like because it's a 2D fighter game. We don't call Tekken Virtual Fighter-like because it's a 3D fighting game, and Virtual Fighter pioneered that series, right? Or that style game. We call them fighting games, and it makes it to where we don't look down upon them just based upon the name. I feel like we look down upon games in the genre because we call them Souls-like. if they try to deviate from the Souls formula. It seems like they're met with hostility or animosity. But overall, I think Lies of P is really good. I think it's a very good game. I think they did a lot of things great here. It runs well. I have to say this. Games I've been playing lately have been running like garbage. It runs phenomenal on Unreal Engine 4, even though Unreal Engine 4 had its problems, right? I personally thought it was going to be an indie game. When it came out, there was a whole bunch of Souls-like indie games that were coming out. I say indie games, but some of them were like $30, $40 when I looked up, like Steel Rising, and there's another one off the top of my head I couldn't remember. I thought it was going to be an indie game. Maybe I didn't pay enough attention to the advertisements, but when it came out and it was a full-fledged game, I was shocked. I was pretty surprised by the amount of content you got in this game. They did a job well done. I think they deserve the success that this game got, and I think the DLC is really good too. I think they did a job well done here. All right, that's all.
So dance, while I put you in